Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. It is Sandy and Sean on Mile High Sports. That is Sandy Clough. My name is Shawn Drotar. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday. Broncos minicamp in full swing. Obviously, it's I don't know how much of a swing you get in when it's 3 days, but it is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They reach the middle point. The Broncos have Courtland Sutton in the building. We'll hear more from him as the program goes along. But as minicamp gets going, Sandy, really the best chance to take a look at the Denver Broncos for head coach Sean Payton and his staff in year two of a roster turnover that has been substantial. The expectations across the board, we know the expectations on this program. We've talked about it before. If you've been, if you've subscribed and watched and listened before, you know that the expectations here between Sandy and I don't count on any playoffs, but the expectations going forward, I guess, can be viewed in two different ways, right? There is both the short-term perspective in the middle of this turnover as this becomes Sean Payton's football team, and the longer term on where that will lead the Broncos in their quest to become, we're not even bothered with champions again. We're going to talk about relevance.
I think relevance is something they need to recapture, presumably before they're ready to take a step into the playoff again.
One would think.
And I don't know. This year does not, in terms of national TV exposure, necessarily resemble 2022 when the Broncos had a new coach.
Right.
And his name was Nathaniel Hackett.
And a new quarterback.
And they also had a new quarterback whose name was and is Russell Wilson.
Right. Now the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. And obviously when you look at the Broncos and the idea of relevance again, look, the NFL sort of handles it itself, right? You win, you become relevant. It doesn't really matter who you are. And most teams, when you're talking about this long drought in the playoffs, only the New York Jets have gone longer without a playoff appearance than the Broncos. Of course, the Broncos drought started immediately after they won Super Bowl 50. So all of the quarterback changes, all of the coaches changes. Of course, Wilson's not here. Hackett's not here. Sean Payton is here. And now Bo Nix is here. That gives the Broncos a little bit of buzz, but that can be a double-edged sword as well. Can the expectations be too high for a team, especially with Bo Nix being drafted at the 12th overall pick, where a lot of teams sort of thought he was really a second rounder?
Well, that's true. That part of it is true. I don't know how he necessarily elevates the Broncos, at least for now. The sixth quarterback taken in the first 12 picks, but yes, the sixth quarterback taken. Mm-hmm. Now, the Broncos certainly assume, and we have even allowed for the distinct possibility that he may be a lot better than the sixth best quarterback when all is said and done.
Let's
say we turn ahead 3 or 4 years and look back on this draft and the order in which the quarterback. And if you redraft again in 2027 or 2028, perhaps the order is a little bit different. Maybe Caleb Williams is not number 1. Maybe Jaden Daniels is. But maybe Bo Nix is number 3 or number 4, not number 6.
Oh, you could see it. I mean, I don't think people are absolutely sold on Drake May. I think there was a lot of surprise, I think, of how quickly and how high that J.J. McCarthy climbed, coming from a Michigan team that
one team loved him, and that's all it took.
A running team. And so, I could see the pairing of Nix and Payton being an effective one. And actually, quite frankly, I do, because I think Sean Payton's offense, while it remains to be seen when he has all the pieces in place, if it still functions at a high level in today's NFL. The NFL is known for changing very, very quickly and adapting new trends and adjusting to older ones. There are very few coaches that have been successful for a long time that haven't had to reinvent, and that includes an Andy Reid, for example. It includes a Mike Tomlin, who now has Russell Wilson saying he is, quote, revived at the quarterback position. But the coaches that have been there a really long time, you do have to reinvent.
That might be a point, by the way, on which Russell Wilson and Sean Payton agree.
Perhaps
he needed to feel revived, which speaks to perhaps what his attitude was here.
But
that he didn't ever feel as if his career was being revived.
Right. Right. And I would pretty much argue it wasn't. It ended up being a bad year 2 years ago, and then a year ago he ended up the season on the bench. So, I mean, obviously that's not much of a revival.
No. From a statistical point of view, I thought last year was a distinct improvement over the year before. But this is a little different because while you don't have a new coach, he's only in his second year.
Right.
And you have a rookie quarterback. Now, the Broncos drafted one in Paxton Lynch back in 2016, late in the first round. But they haven't drafted a quarterback this high in the draft since they took Jay Cutler in 2006 on the first round.
And he was only one selection ahead of the 11th overall pick, right, with Cutler. So that's part of the reason why we talk about the idea that there's no quarterback competition. It's Bo Nix's job, presuming that he's healthy by the time the season rolls around.
Although, just for the record, yesterday, Jarrett Stidham worked with the first team, Zach Wilson with the second, Bo Nix with the third, but people like Quinn Miners and Courtland Sutton, who apparently haven't gotten the script.
That there's a competition.
What you're supposed to say is there is a vicious, unrelenting competition going on for the number one quarterback spot. Miners said it feels, in a sense, as if he's been here before. He's talking about the guy who yesterday was the third string quarterback.
Right.
That's Quinn Miners talking about Bo Nix. And with respect to Courtland Sutton, he's basically talking about, well, I know what the politics are, but he looks like the guy who's going to be the opening day quarterback.
And he's the guy that the coach brought in. And I think that's a big part of it as well. We do understand that. But the idea that right now the Broncos have been down for so long and they've missed the playoffs every year since Super Bowl 50, by far the longest playoff drought from any team that immediately followed a Super Bowl win. Now, granted, Peyton Manning retired at that point when the Broncos have only had two quarterbacks immediately win Super Bowls and retire. By the way, those are the only two quarterbacks that have ever done it, in John Elway and Peyton Manning. So some of that is obviously somewhat unique to Denver, but it is unusual no matter what for a team to win
nobody
a Super Bowl
could have guessed that it would be 8 years.
No, nobody. And Sean Payton is the man charged with making sure that the Broncos eventually work their way back. And Payton is a guy that, if you remember about this point last year, had a lot of axes to grind across the league following his return to the NFL. He had a chance yesterday to talk about some of the negative perceptions of the Broncos around the league. Now, obviously, they're going to be there because around the league, they've missed the playoffs since the 2015 season. It's 2024, and we don't think they're going to make it this year.
And I would say, and tell me if you disagree, 2016, they weren't one of the 10 worst teams in the NFL.
No.
They were 9-17. They finished by falling on their faces, going 2-4 in the last 6, but up to then they were 7-3 and looked like a playoff team, if not a division winner again, which would have continued their streak, which at the time was not quite as long as Kansas City's is now, but it was still pretty long, going back to 2011, even without Peyton Manning, and continuing in 12, 13, 14, and 15 consecutive years in which the Broncos and the Chiefs won the division. And I'm thinking 2010 was the last year that someone other than Kansas City or Denver won the AFC West. But in any case, I would dare say 2017 through 2023, that's 7 years, that after every one of those seasons, you'd be fairly confident that you would not encounter much of an argument in contending that the Broncos were one of the 10 worst teams in the NFL in any of those losing years.
Yeah.
By the end of the season.
I think that's fair.
By the end of the season.
And so the narrative nationally is going to be negative by default. I mean, you understand that. But Peyton, who certainly has an awful lot of confidence, ego, whatever you want to call it, the nature of head coaches, especially in the pro levels, have a little bit of that. But Peyton had a chance to sit down and talk a little bit after the first minicamp practice of those narratives.
No, I think that I have two middle fingers. I've gotten better with age not using them. And I think it's more, and I would say this has changed for me. It's more inward focused relative to our own team and what we're doing relative to, as you get older in this, you don't waste the calories on certain things that I might have, back in 06, 7, 8. I don't play a lot of video games, but you got X amount of battery life and energy, and you try to use it where you think it's best going to help the team, and so you learn over time to not spend as much on the things you can't control, or certainly lists, or if that concerned me, we wouldn't have drafted Bo Nix, where we selected him. If I was paying attention to that. And so that's that NFL train that no one knows who's driving, and you got to pay attention to it, but you just don't want to hop on it, or you just start making decisions, and we still don't know who's driving it. It's just going. And so really paying attention to your gut, your experience, and what you're seeing. Those are the things that drive me now.
Now, I don't think you have to go back to 08, what he talked about. He was pretty feisty last year.
I was going to say,
yeah.
I would challenge the notion that this is an attitude that he's held for a number of years,
right?
Maybe post Bountygate. I would say Seth Wickersham last August, whom we had on this program, wrote the definitive Sean Payton piece for all time, in my opinion. And a lot of that feistiness and a lot of pushback from Payton on things that other people had said and done over which he had little or no control, including his predecessor as head coach, including the commissioner of the NFL. He nailed just about everybody that he could possibly criticize as recently as a year ago. Do I think he's calmed down this year? He's a much more relaxed figure. Yes.
Yeah.
I even think the line about I have two middle fingers is a little more lighthearted than he might have been a year ago, allowing
for
the possibility that reasonable people can view the Broncos until they show that they're a playoff caliber team, view them unfavorably, if they view them at all. And I think, his reference to Bo Nix, we wouldn't have drafted Bo Nix if we had listened to all the people who were saying Bo Nix wasn't a first-round draft choice.
Fair enough. That's what I talked about.
Okay.
Many teams had a second-round grade on him.
Right. But around here, and I think in some cases nationally, people who knew what was going on, the idea that it was somehow cutting against the grain, that nobody could have possibly anticipated that the Broncos would draft a quarterback, one, and that quarterback would be Bo Nix,
right?
And they liked him better than any of the other quarterbacks they possibly could have drafted, including J.J. McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a mystery. And he seems to be suggesting that Bo Nix was viewed by some as the seventh best quarterback or worse than that in this draft, and that's just not true. That doesn't mean that everybody had him going in the first round,
right?
But when it was clear that Denver was going to choose a quarterback, and I think that was pretty clear to most of us around here for quite some time, and we were leading that parade.
After you benched Russell Wilson,
of course you don't draft somebody 12th overall. I don't care if he's the second quarterback drafted or the sixth quarterback drafted. You don't draft him 12th overall if it isn't your intent to build your team around this guy, to start him, especially after he's played 61 college games as a starting quarterback, and especially considering the fact that he's 24 years old. He's not 20 or 21.
Yeah.
You don't kind of ease him into things. So some of the things he's setting up there, I I understand what he's driving at, but does anybody believe that Bo Nix was considered by any serious observer to be anything other than one of the top 6 quarterbacks in this draft?
No.
Nobody.
No.
Nobody. So when 5 got drafted in the first 10 picks, Nix going number 12 to Denver, I thought was the least surprising pick outside of Caleb Williams going to Chicago. And I think Daniels going to Washington, number 2 overall.
Yeah.
It was the least surprising pick in the entire round.
Obviously, the Broncos know they will be heading forward with Bo Nix, and even in that statement there by Payton, the fact that he pointed out we weren't listening to anybody, that's why we picked Bo Nix. That wasn't a statement saying, he's our second rounder. We hope that one day he'll take over. He's the guy. But we'll talk more about this. Payton had a chance to talk about some of the Broncos' depth. Depth, of course, was one of the major problems on this roster last year. We'll tell you more about that in a minute. You got a chance to hear from the coach. But I want to remind you that in just about a month and 1 day, as a matter of fact, the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds. That's Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site. And of course, it's the Whiskey Fest. More than 50 different whiskey vendors will be on site. Festival is 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. Tickets are available online, and we're going to save you some money. If you use the promo code MHS, you'll save $15 right off the top for the Whiskey Fest. So it's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. If you're 21 and up, you can get those tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. Remember, you can use that promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets. Enjoy that 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest, Douglas County Fairgrounds. 50 vendors and more for whiskey alone. If you're a fan, Saturday, July 13th, that's where you want to be. Colorado.com, and then use promo code MHS to save $15. For the Broncos, depth is obviously a major concern. It's a concern for teams that are bad. Injury rates in the NFL is 100%. No one's ever gone through a season where nobody got hurt, where you didn't have a starter that got injured. It's just not the way the sport works. So for the Broncos, depth is important. Depth has been a problem for a while. Sometimes it's been an issue of bad drafts. Sometimes it's been an issue of poor free agent signings. Sometimes it's been a combination. But Payton had a chance to talk yesterday about 3 different players that have a chance to be very, very interesting. We'll get to the parts of the quarterback competition. There is a quarterback competition on the Denver Broncos. It's for who's going to back up Bo Nix. And maybe at the moment, these Jets might have the inside track.
He's doing well. I mean, clearly within the framework of what we're doing, he's much further along than, in year 1 and in the transition. I'd say he's looked real sharp during this offseason program, real decisive, and I think the leadership he's able to provide there, and there's good competition.
Doesn't sound like he's talking about a starter. Obviously, Stidham started the last couple of games as Payton moved on from Wilson to look for a spark. But the point there is very accurate. If you're looking at the backup for Bo Nix, you have a more veteran guy in Stidham. You have a guy that has already been in the system for a year. That makes a big difference to Sean Payton. And at least the early returns on Zach Wilson have not been very good. As you pointed out earlier this week, it's pretty hard in, minicamp and OTAs to get picked on as looking subpar. But that was happening with Wilson. It has to feel that Stidham is the leader in the clubhouse to back up Nix, if only for the fact he's already been here for a year and knows how to work with Sean Payton.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that for now, Stidham is the clear number 2. That's basically what he's been throughout his pro career.
Right.
He's had several starts, one against San Francisco 2 years ago while he was a Raider. Was impressive.
That probably helped get him this job.
And certainly caught the eye of Sean Payton.
Right.
And that's why he was able to outmaneuver the Raiders and Josh McDaniels for the services of Jarrett Stidham. But Jarrett Stidham was brought in late last year to start 2 games in the 17th and 18th weeks of the season to provide Denver with a spark. A spark was the furthest thing from any reasonable review of those 2 games.
Right.
There was no spark. coming from Stidham or really from anybody else. And now we're finding out more and more about Courtland Sutton's ankle injury, that's what took him out of the last game of the year. He caught one pass for 4 yards, I believe, in that game. Had surgery, which we knew about, but I really thought he'd be further along. But apparently for public consumption, they're trotting out the notion now that, well, and this is mainly Sutton, it wasn't so much his being concerned with his contract, although he did express some concern. And
we'll hear from him in a little bit.
We'll hear more on that. But it was also a point of agreement between Courtland Sutton and Sean Payton that he stay in Florida, work out on his own, but more than work out, rehabilitate due to the ankle injury, which the Broncos and Sutton would both have you believe renders him at the present time as a less than 100% participant in even something as innocuous as a minicamp.
And obviously being out of your top receiver who gets hurt in the final game of the year, that didn't help Jared Stidham. And that's probably part of the consideration. One of the things to keep an eye on, though, as we get closer to training camp and maybe even the preseason, when you look for that number 2 job behind Bo Nix, is that Jared Stidham makes $7 million this year. He makes more money this year than Nix and Wilson combined. Were the Broncos to move on from him, they take a $2 million dead cap hit. Well, for the Broncos this year, and dead cap hit, just throw it on the pile. There's plenty there. They're going to set a new record for the most dead cap money ever in a single season. Right. But you'd save $5 million in cash. $5 million moving away from Jared Stidham. That might be the window of opportunity that Zach Wilson could jump into if he's good enough to do it. But when you talk about those wide receivers, and you talk about the injuries, it's hard to think of a couple years ago where people across the league, and you and I talked about this, it was overblown. But the notion that the Broncos, when they had Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick and supposedly maybe the best receiving core in the league, that was always a very silly statement. But it was something that a lot of people in the NFL ran with. Well, Tim Patrick has been out now for 2 seasons. 2 non-contact injuries have kept him out. Obviously, unfortunate. We know that he got good hands, good route runner, good possession receiver, good in the back of the end zone, 6'4", with the ability to get those big old bear paws and bring in the touchdowns. But what have the injuries taken away? The Broncos restructured his contract. He has a minimal contract for only this year. Payton had an opportunity to talk about Patrick, where it stands today.
Just those intangibles, I do know and obviously have seen healthy tape. Granted, I wasn't here, but so I kind of have an idea or a vision for the player, and then all the other things that he brings relative to his competitiveness, his versatility. He's a great teammate, and I think he's an important part of the locker room. And so it's good to see him getting work, and we'll be smart with that.
That's a slightly different take from Sean Payton when you're talking about guys that preceded him. I can't recall too many times he's talked about his value in the locker room, his effectiveness as a teammate, which Payton did have a chance to see. Patrick couldn't play, but he was around. Do you think that has an impact on this at all? And Payton may look at it and say, look, if he's healthy enough, I can use this guy. He's not expensive. He's a veteran. He knows what he's supposed to do. It feels to me as if Tim Patrick is a long shot to make this roster because of the injuries and because of his familiarity with Payton. But the way Payton speaks about him there makes me think, well, okay, maybe he gets a clean slate as long as he's healthy.
He would have been able to learn the offense, even though he was injured early in camp. He would have been able to familiarize himself with the offense.
Certainly.
He was around here.
I mean, he got hurt practicing.
Right.
So, yeah, he knew the offense.
What I remember is that under Nathaniel Hackett, he was hurt so early in camp.
Oh, yeah.
That I don't remember Hackett ever advancing an opinion of any kind on Tim Patrick one way or the other, beyond the standard, gee, we're sorry he got hurt. It's a blow. But he was the prince of positivism during that training camp.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't much negative that Nathaniel Hackett could find in anything that was going on during his first and only training camp as head coach of the Denver Broncos. What I remember, and you may remember this too, Vic Fangio under normal circumstances, very sparing in his praise for any player, but particularly with respect to Tim Patrick, who was fairly productive during Fangio's time here.
Mm-hmm.
All he could think of to say about Tim Patrick was how slow he was, as I remember it.
And the odds are, unfortunately, after the injury, he's probably not getting much faster. One of the guys that had a lot of speed coming out of college, made him an intriguing mid-round prospect, and a Sean Payton guy last year, was Riley Moss, coming out cornerback out of Iowa, a kind of a ball hawking type of guy with a lot of speed. The idea that he might be moved to safety at some point in his career, given the size. But at cornerback, where there is a wide open job, wide open, across from Pat Surtain, Riley Moss, maybe after the core muscle surgery that took him out of the majority of the season, only played, he had 6 tackles all year. But Riley Moss seems to be recovered. And again, you listen to Sean Payton, and I get it. This is the time of the year when everybody, except maybe Zach Wilson, it always impresses. But Moss was one of the guys they hoped for a lot more as a rookie. You could hear it a little bit when Payton speaks about him, about the potential, and maybe he's even in the mix to be a starter.
Well, he's smart. I'd say you feel his length at corner. When I say that, just even on that play, it's a tougher play to make if you're a shorter corner. So you feel his length. He's got real good transitional skills, and I think he's smart. So he's picking up the technique, and he's got versatility outside in. But we've got good competition there.
If Moss, he missed part of the season.
Say it again.
He missed before the season training camp last year.
Yeah.
Having these off-season reps, how valuable is that for him?
I think. Look, I think it's valuable for all of them. I said this to him even when we brought everyone up. The goal here is we install. Call it the first 7 installs or 8, and then we start again today. Back to 1, 2, 3. In training camp, we start again. And the goal is to put our best foot forward when we get to training camp. So there's certain positions that obviously further away from the ball, it's a little easier to do your job, and it's much more challenging for the inside guys.
There's a lot of football to be played, to be practiced until they find someone opposite of Pat Surtain. But it feels to me, honestly, because even though they did add veteran Levi Wallace, there were around the league, Wallace didn't garner a lot of attention. It feels to me as if maybe this is not only one of the most important competitions on the team, but maybe the hardest to predict, trying to find another quarterback. Chris Abrams-Drain in that mix, but as you've pointed out before, maybe a guy in the slot. Jaquan McMillan certainly looked more like a guy that was a slot corner.
Yeah.
Maybe a bigger body on the outside is a fit, and maybe that's a window for Moss.
Well, I think so. And you have to remember,
certainly that's what Payton envisioned.
Riley Moss, who was in charge of the
draft.
Riley Moss taking it. That would be Sean Payton. And so it's not surprising he views Riley Moss favorably. I think Riley Moss could very conceivably be the opening day starter on the outside opposite Patrick Surtain. I think that could happen. I won't say it definitively will happen, but I have a pretty good idea of who it won't be. It won't be Damari Mathis, who opened last year opposite Surtain as the starting quarterback. It won't be Mathis. And Abrams-Drain, I think, has the problem of being a rookie, and perhaps starting him right from the beginning. He's not the quarterbacking version of Bo Nix.
Yeah, you don't immediately
certainly not
pop him in.
Certainly not Surtain. I would think. I thought, because of the weakness at the position, when they threw Mathis in, it was too soon. I remember I had that awful first game where he drew about 6,000 penalty flags.
I think it was 2 pass interference calls.
Just the flags were flying all night in his direction. And I think he recovered from that his first year and got better. But of course, new coaching staff came in last year and he did not impress. And he didn't remain as the starter for very long last year opposite Surtain, and they threw a bunch of people out there. But yes, I think, again, I'm assuming that he will physically be able to play, but if anyone has maybe a slight edge to be that second cornerback on the outside, it would be Riley Moss, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's sort of a similar thing to Tim Patrick in the fact he was around the team all year, and certainly not a lot of changes on the defensive side when it comes to coaching. So he's already got the system, and that's a leg up on, say, an Abrams drain. It's about health and the ability to adjust and adapt to the NFL speed and NFL game.
Well, again, back to Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio soured on another Iowa cornerback, who in my opinion should have been a safety.
Michael Ojemudia.
Michael Ojemudia.
Who I agree with you,
soured
absolutely should have been a safety because
like
he didn't have the speed to play
like
at NFL corner.
that.
Yeah.
Soured on him.
And that was it.
And that was it for him. And now you've got Riley Moss being more or less endorsed by his head coach.
Yeah.
Riley Moss is the cornerback from Iowa who, at least at the beginning of his career, I think will see a lot of playing time.
He will get a chance.
He'll get his chance, and they won't sour on him after one or two bad games.
Be interesting to watch as this goes along. Obviously, when training camp rolls along in the tail end of July, Riley Moss, one of the guys to really pay attention to, as well as Chris Abrams drain, back-to-back years in which the Broncos have picked cornerbacks. In fact, back-to-back years in which they picked them from Iowa. So again, they've been going in that direction. So we'll see how that shakes out. Courtland Sutton is at Broncos minicamp, mandatory minicamp. Sutton is there. So he's not holding out, but the situation is somewhat fraught. We'll hear a little bit from Sutton in a moment, but we want to take a moment for listen to our message from our friends at Zahner Hart & Law.
Well, we talk about planning on this show every day, as you know, and teams sometimes have plans that are easy to comprehend, and sometimes they don't. But something no one ever plans for is car accident. And you certainly can't anticipate one. A friend of mine was in a car accident the other day. Unfortunately, she lives out of state and can't take advantage of the people we have here, the people at Zahner Hart & Law, for example, because you definitely need the best. If you've been in an accident, you suffered any kind of injury, Kurt Zahner and Mark Harden are the types of lawyers you want handling your case. Two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and throughout the country. They've won nearly every award possible, super lawyers, top 100 national trial lawyers, and many other awards beyond that. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels, and even on Good Morning America. These guys handle the most important cases, and they'll get the job done for you. They believe in a safe community, and they have the respect, which not all injury attorneys have, of insurance companies. With all the multi-million dollar verdicts going through these days, you're lucky to have these guys in our backyard. So if you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zahner Hardin today at yourstorywill-be-told.com. That's yourstorywill-be-told.com.
For Courtland Sutton's future with the Denver Broncos, it's up in the air. Sutton has $2 million guaranteed left in the last 2 years of his deal. Now, the contract is worth about $35 million, but as we understand at the NFL, the guaranteed money is the only thing you worry about because your injury rate in the NFL is very, very high. So Courtland Sutton spent the offseason with all the voluntary OTAs away from the team, but when it came to the rubber hitting the road, exactly as you suggested last week, Sandy, when you only have $2 million guaranteed, you're not interested in taking about $100,000 fine to miss minicamp. So Sutton is here, but the situation on the contract still is very much front of mind. Yesterday, Sutton had a chance to talk specifically about that.
You know, my team and I have been in contact with, the guys upstairs to handle all of that stuff. And, we kind of were going back and forth trying to figure out the best way to, kind of find a middle ground for the situation. And, we are at a stalemate in a sense. But, I have confidence and faith that the right thing will be done.
Remember the old game show Password?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit before your time.
No, I remember it.
But the password here is stalemate.
Yeah, it is. That when that word comes up, that's not good. Courtland Sutton, as we talked about, $2 million left, but his cap hit on the team, $17.39 million, is the second highest behind only Garrett Bowles, who has a cap hit of $20 million. It's worth noting with both of those guys, although I think since the Broncos don't have depth, Garrett Bowles is likely safe in what would likely be the final year of his deal at age 32. But Sutton, even if the Broncos were to decide to just move on, the dead cap hit is big, $9.6 million, but he's set to make 17.3. There is very little incentive for the Denver Broncos to give Courtland Sutton a new contract. Now, I've talked about this before. If I were Courtland Sutton, I would consider holding out to get one or push for a trade, which I think is where this is likely going to end up eventually, finding another home for Courtland Sutton. But as it stands right now, when you hear stalemate, it's not great. So it's not quite Marshawn Lynch's "I'm just here so I won't get fined," but it's not that far removed from it. Because when you talk about stalemate and you're still here at minicamp, that's why you're here.
Yeah, and he made it very clear that he was not thrilled with the way negotiations have
Right.
gone. And my sense is that neither side is giving an inch.
Neither side has any reason.
The Broncos have no reason to give him substantially more guaranteed money. None.
No.
None whatsoever. And I think now it's interesting that the ankle injury and the surgery that followed is being played up. And Sutton's even talked about it. I think that will be the driving factor at the end of the day that will preclude his staying here. It doesn't make any sense to me for him to stay or for the Broncos to keep him for this year.
Right.
And then just wave goodbye. At least try to get something in terms of trades.
If the future isn't with the Broncos at all, you might as well get something that will help you with the future, even if it's a 6th-round pick, something.
No matter what you think about how much leverage he has, and maybe we'll get into that because I know you believe he has more leverage than generally people believe.
Although I think he just gave some up, but yes, I do think
by showing up, you think he gave up leverage
a little bit, although it gives him the opportunity to voice this in public, which is maybe offsetting it.
And that may be one of the reasons, not saying it's the only one of the reasons he showed up.
Because he knew he'd get microphones in his face. Sure.
He'd be able to go on the record and say, hey, I'm not being unreasonable, but we're not getting anywhere. It's a stalemate. And I'm not being unreasonable. Those are the 2 points he tried to get across yesterday. I'm not asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. I'm just being reasonable, and they're unbending. And we are no further along now than we were several months ago. Now, the point at which both teams can agree, at least for now, is that if he had to play a game on Sunday, he couldn't. The ankle isn't sufficiently ready for the pounding,
and that, of course,
that a wide receiver would take
a potential trade essentially impossible. So that's a concern as well.
For now, I think it does because he's got to show that he's healthy. That's why, for his own sake, I agree with Keeler in the Post today, saying that he's got to demonstrate that he's a healthy player if he's going to be traded.
Yeah. Obviously, that's one of the concerns. And he had a chance to talk about the challenges of improving every year and a little bit about the Denver Broncos quarterbacks, which now he's becoming accustomed to a couple of the new ones. Here's what he said yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, that's the number one thing for myself. Each year, it's really important for me to continue to make sure that I'm ascending in my career and not get into a spot where I feel like I stalemate. I feel like I have so much more left in myself, in my body, mentally, physically. You know, I feel like I have so much that's left to be able to give, and you know, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to, you know, go out and produce and do more. You know, it was nice to be able to have the 10 touchdowns, but I know there's more in there. You know, I missed some, left some out there this past year, and you know, Russ and I had a really good connection. But you know, I you know, am looking forward to see what Russ does in his next endeavors, and then I'm also looking forward to myself and looking forward to seeing, you know, where my talents can take me, what new heights I'm able to get to with, you know, whoever winds up being the guy that, you know, they pick to be the starter. You know, that's a really good room right now. Those guys out there competing really well. While I was away, I was able to watch some of the film and get to, you know, see the guys throw the ball around, and they all look really good. So it's going to be a really fun training camp, you know, seeing guys go out there and compete, and whoever winds up emerging, you know, if I'm, you know, blessed and lucky enough to be able to catch passes from them this upcoming season, then, you know, I think we're going to be able to do some special things.
Yeah, and again, I think the point is to sound reasonable in everything he's saying.
And still, you still sound like a good teammate, and you're ready to go.
He's articulate, and he's savvy enough. He's been around for a while. What's it been? 7 years now. This is his 7th year.
Yeah, he'll turn 29 this year. Yeah.
So he can. He knows his way around microphones. He knows what to say and what not to say. I would draw, though, on the fact that in the last 6 years, and this was part of Keeler's column today, Sutton's registered one season out of those 6 in which he's had more than 70 catches. That was 2019. More than 1,000 receiving yards. That, again, was 2019. And one with more than 6 touchdown receptions, and that was last year, of course, as we've talked about and you have emphasized, where 10 touchdown receptions on a Bronco team last year that certainly in the first half of the season wasn't throwing a lot of touchdown passes around, more in the second half of the year, at least before
the number 2 guy on the team was Brandon Johnson.
Yeah.
Touchdowns. I mean,
right.
Yikes.
Right. Absolutely. So, but again, the money that he makes over the course of this contract, the guaranteed money, is more than Chase makes on his deal in Cincinnati. Diggs makes in his deal, once with Buffalo, now, of course, with Houston. And his contract average of a little over $15 million per year is higher than DeAndre Hopkins, Chase again, and Garrett Wilson of the Jets. So I think this would be the Broncos' argument. Yes, only $2 million left on his deal guaranteed. But look at all the guaranteed money he's made already.
And if you play well, look what you will make.
Right. But since signing that deal, apart from the 10 touchdowns, where have the700 been? Receivers who catch 60 passes a year for 800 yards, they grow on trees.
He was 55th in the league.
They grow on trees. You can find receivers like that at a sort of production level that resembles his. They exist all over the league, and they're called, at best, number 2 receivers, and in most cases, number 3 receivers.
Right.
They're Josh Reynolds type. Josh Reynolds can give you 55, 60 catches for 700 to 800 yards.
That's
Josh
the problem.
Reynolds can give you that, but he's not a starting wideout.
The sales pitch for Sutton obviously talks about not only his ability, but given the injury history, a desire to get better, and how much he still really appreciates football. He had an opportunity to talk about how in his career that his desire, of course, hasn't wavered.
I mean, missing OTAs wasn't easy for me. I love ball. I love this game. I love the camaraderie that it brings with my teammates. I love seeing the pure joy on people's faces when they play it and when they watch it. And so for myself to not be able to, be around, and even if I was able to do rehab here and just be around, for me not being around, it was definitely a tough couple of months of not being able to be around with the guys and just, just be around ball. And so, it was definitely something that was considered. I'm not gonna say I wasn't a fan, but obviously I'm here, so that's the biggest thing. I wanted to make sure that it was known that, I was upset about how the contract went about, how the conversation went about, how the stalemate has persisted. But I also wanted to be known that, I love ball. I love the guys. Be able to come out here and watch practice and to be around the guys, even just to stretch and move around with them a little bit was so much fun, man. I enjoyed it, to the fullest. And so, it was something that was considered, but I don't think it was a high consideration just because, I think that the point has been made already. I think that everyone who needs to know knows what the situation is. And like I said earlier, I'm hoping that we're able to, find a solution and get to the bottom of this, because this is where I want to be. And just hoping that it's mutual.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate y'all.
That last phrase is the key phrase. I'm hoping it's mutual.
It is a very narrow fairway that
Yes.
Courtland Sutton is trying to hit, especially being injured as well. Like, so you can't play right now.
It's
but you
narrower
definitely
than
wanna be out
U.S.
with the
Open
guys.
fairways, about
Yeah.
which we'll talk a little bit later on in the
Hey,
program.
we really will. And obviously that's going to be something to watch as all this goes along. Minicamp wraps up tomorrow out at Dove Valley. And you see these golf issues right above us here. The man on this side, Wyndham Clark from Colorado, is the defending U.S. Open champion. We'll talk about him in a minute. But before that, obviously, over the last 4 years, you've heard all the ads, seen all the ads, probably been overwhelmed by them. You might even know all of them in your sleep now when you're talking about online sports betting. And maybe you've been looking to get into the fun, and maybe you've been looking to have some of that action for yourself, but you don't know the best deal to get into. And it can be confusing. There are so many different sports books offering so many different ways for you to get into it. Maybe you don't know what's best, and what's best for you might be different than what's best for someone else. So we're going to add a little bit more to it for you, but this is designed to make it easier. Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers, and we put them on one single page on our website. So you can do the comparison shopping for you, and you can make it easy. We wanted to make it easy for people who get maybe confused by this very interesting landscape that changes so quickly. So we grabbed all of those, research them all, we bring them all together in a spot so you can find the best way to hop in and enjoy the fun yourself. Whether that's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, everything is all in one place. It's easy to get to. Go to milehighsports.com today, or you can download our mobile app and then click on Colorado Sports Betting. It's just that easy. All of those offers will be all in one place for you. You can select the opportunity and the right sportsbook to jump in with and make sure that you have the most fun and the quickest way possible that works for you. Always make sure that you bet responsibly, but it's just that simple. We'll make it easy for you. And think of it as your bonus from your friends here at Mile High Sports. We talk a little bit about Wyndham Clark and the U.S. Open. Clark moved, obviously, came out of essentially nowhere, though he was a top player in the world, the top 100, and then wins the U.S. Open and becomes a international name. Now, Colorado has had U.S. Open winners before. Exactly one of them. He won it 3 times. That would be Haler when he won back in 74, 79, and 1990, the Golf Hall of Famer. But Wyndham Clark set to do something that very few people ever get to do. Not just win a U.S. Open, but come back as the defending champion. And joining us to talk about that is the editor-in-chief of Mile High Sports, the man responsible for those 2 lovely magazines that you see above our heads there, Doug Ottewill. Doug, thank you for joining us. The idea of being able to get Wyndham Clark on the cover, get him into this magazine, when you know that, this time frame for him is going to be really intense. That's a real treat. And to see a Colorado kid, formerly, Valley Christian, go out and now be one of the world's best with an opportunity to defend a major, it's a good get. And it's pretty special to find out where he is now from last year, where you had Wyndham Clark in this as well prior to winning the U.S. Open. So, one, is Mile High Sports some sort of reverse Sports Illustrated jinx and he's going to win again?
It wasn't for Carmelo Anthony. I mean, Carmelo, every year we used to put, can Carmelo be an all-star, or can Carmelo get the Nuggets to the NBA Finals? And it never quite worked. It was a little bit of the SI jinx, but recently it's been working out pretty well. And Wyndham's the last good example, because Vanessa Hughes, who did the interview last year, also did the interview this year. She got him not that long before the U.S. Open. And she did the interview and kind of teed up the fact that he was a hot golfer, had just won his first PGA Tour event, and was heading into the U.S. Open, obviously having no idea that he was about to win it. But yeah, we reminded people that we had a lot to do with that, for sure.
I can remember somebody named Derek White, who I think is playing some basketball still.
He's still in it.
June, being on the cover, seemed to.
That's another good call. Recently, it has been a pretty big, good omen.
You're on a roll.
Yeah.
What do you think? And I've read the piece, and obviously you're the editor. What came out of that piece that made it presumably less surprising, maybe, when he won the U.S. Open a year ago?
Well, I think a little bit is the things that he talks about in the interview, then and now, but also, and this is kind of the benefit of hindsight and the fact that, these type of shows probably were happening about the same time that we conducted the interview. But for anybody that's seen the Netflix documentary Full Swing, you really get a 360-degree look at his approach to the mental side of the game. Yeah. And it's funny because it works so well for him. The series on Netflix actually almost took that as an entire theme of one show, and they talked to a bunch of golfers about, it's not about your swing path, it's about how does your mind work from one shot to the next, or one hole to the next, or one bogey to a birdie, or from one season to the next. And I think that's what is really fascinating, is that Wyndham Clark, and it's stated more than once in the interview, has really, really embraced the sports psychology side of his sport. And he's been a good golfer his whole life. He really has. But I think the difference between being a good golfer and someone who has the ability to close out the U.S. Open with mega stars on his tail, Rory was nip and tuck. He's got guys chasing him that are household names, and at the time he definitely was not, and he succeeded. And I think that's it. He can hit all the golf shots, all those guys can, but the difference comes in that mental game, and he's mastered it. And I know he's not playing as well.
He's not at the top of his game right now as he was last year.
But I do tend to think, and maybe this is hopeful, that a guy that has embraced that side of his game has the ability to compartmentalize and say, you know what I've done the last two tournaments doesn't have anything to do with what I'm going to do in the U.S. Open. So I still think that he has just as good a shot of winning it. I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of golfers that have better Vegas odds, so to speak.
Especially Scotty Scheffler. Who's the overwhelming favorite.
Yeah, as he should be. I mean, that guy's not only playing well, but he's figured it out, obviously. But I think Wyndham has the ability to be right there on Sunday, just like any of these other guys.
Yeah, in Clark's case this year, 13 events, 4 top 10 finishes, and a win in the FedEx Cup standings. He's 5th. Of course, Scheffler is 1st. But then again, he has the experience of one thing that a lot of folks in this field don't have. You mentioned Rory McIlroy, who he beat by a stroke. The man in 3rd place was Scheffler, who he beat by 3. So when you can do it, that does change things. And the confidence that he builds, you're talking about a guy that backed Valor, won the Colorado Golf Championship twice. A good week for Valor, by the way. Christian McCaffrey, who attended at the same time as Wyndham Clark, named to the cover of the Madden 25 video game, which is a cherry on top of the massive contract that he got.
I'm sure
things look pretty good for Valor Christian Athletics right now. But yeah, in Clark's case, we talked about just before you came on, Hale Irwin, other Colorado golf superstar who won the U.S. Open and did it 3 times over a long stretch of time. But he always seemed to be in the hunt year after year in the U.S. Open, because once you've won it, not only do you know you can win it, everybody else on the course knows you can win it. And sometimes you talk about the psychological part of it, that gets into the other guys' heads.
Well, I think anybody that has played golf can relate. And it's not about whether or not a guy like me or you, Sean, can go win the U.S. Open. No. We can't. But I think it goes from, hey, the first time you ever break 100, it's in the back of your head when you haven't, but once you do it, you can. First time you break 90, you know what it takes to get that done. And okay, well, if I have a triple on a hole, it doesn't mean I can't break 90. It just means I got to play bogey golf from here on out. I mean, It's that kind of mentality. And obviously at the PGA level, it's an entirely different level, but I think anybody can relate in that game specifically, that you do have to have a different mindset. But once you can beat a guy like Scheffler, Sandy, to your point, then that's not an obstacle anymore when you are coming down the stretch on Sunday.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of Scheffler's dominance right now. That
same as Tiger back
intimidating. He's intimidating today, not because of anything he does in terms of his personality, and I don't think he conducts himself with a particular swagger or or edginess.
No.
You know, Tiger used to talk about winning with his C+ or B- or B game, which disturbed people, but it was true that he could win with that. But I think that's especially in a U.S. Open. And to me, that was the reason that Hale had so much success, that you knew you were going to have to shoot 20 under par to win the tournament.
Right.
At the U.S. Open,
Right.
you knew that, hey, 3 or 4 under would be a hell of a score.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting with regard to Wyndham. When he won the U.S. Open, like I said, he was not a household name. People were more familiar with him because he had won the Wells Fargo 2 weeks before, something like that. I think
right.
when he
comes tough golf course,
very. But when he comes to Colorado in August, it's going to be really interesting because he will have a crowd. He will have people that are
that'll be a little different, and people will score on that course.
Absolutely. Well, and
I mean, it's a beautiful course and it's not easy. It's not pitch and putt or anything, but people will score big. I think the U.S. Open, though, is always interesting because, and Nicklaus always used to say this, you can, just by listening to people talk, you can basically disqualify 3/4 of the field. Just because they're so psyched up and they complain about how tricked up the course is or how tough it is or how long the rough is or whatever. And Nicklaus used to say, I'd check off dozens of names before the tournament even began. He can't win. He can't win. He can't win. Look at what he's saying.
His mindset.
What's in his mind.
You think the deck stacked against you, that positivity matters. And we're talking about a little bit about the BMW Championship that will be held at Castle Pines this fall with Doug Ottewill, the editor-in-chief of Mile High Sports Magazine. And in the magazine, by the way, not only do you have the feature on Clark, our magazine is the golf magazine right now, but that's one of the more fascinating parts. The idea that we have a hole by hole breakdown in the magazine of Castle Pines and for the BMW Championship, but not the way you normally see it broken down. When you normally see a course breakdown is how you play it. In this case, Doug, the idea was if you're going to go see the BMW Championship, broke down hole by hole as to where the best spots to view it is. How did that come about?
I think it honestly came about from going to several years of the International and remembering sitting on certain holes going, this is a place where I can watch a make or break hole for everybody in the field. Or if you want to watch exactly how good these guys are with a long iron, like this is the hole for you. And I'm not a golf expert or golf snob, so to speak, but I do remember watching those and they were so fun to go watch. And it was amazing to sit there on a certain hole and go, man, look what these guys do with this club or this shot, or knowing even for these guys, this is a difficult hole.
And we don't have time to get into it here deeply, but they have made some changes in the course from the one we last remember watching in tournament competition. There have been some nice changes.
And they were done alongside with Jack Nicklaus still.
Right.
They had, and I believe you were out there, Sandy, they had a sort of an announcement it was last summer when it was coming to Colorado. They had an announcement that said, hey, come down, we're going to tell you what's going to happen. And Jack Nicklaus was on a conference call talking about some of those changes. Right. Super fascinating to hear the guy who designed the course in the first place to go, hey, here's how I wanted to tweak it for these guys now. It's an entirely spectacular approach to having a golf tournament.
He is Doug Ottewill, the editor-in-chief of Mile High Sports Magazine. You see them right over our heads right here. The two different covers with Wyndham Clark, the defending U.S. Open champion, and Alex Singleton of the Denver Broncos. A great breakdown, by the way, with Doug, a much more lighthearted one in the magazine to check it out. You can check those out anywhere, Downton. You can find the Mile High Sports Magazine all over the place. Free, just pick one up. It's a great read. And you can also catch it on our website at milehighsports.com. Doug, always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, great to talk. And I'm fascinated because they're playing at Pinehurst, number 2, a classic course. I think founded in 1892, if I'm not mistaken. So you're talking about you kind of an all-timer, and those courses have to get tweaked over the because guys are hitting it a little longer than they did in the 1890s.
And it's interesting to read about the differences of opinion because, of course, it began as a Donald Ross course, and then it kind of got redesigned, and people didn't liked the redesign. At least the pros didn't seem to like it as much. And then they went back with Crenshaw and Company to restoring the original design and taking out some trees and so on.
Right.
And relying more on the native kind of landscape.
Yeah, and a little more of the coming into this tournament.
And generally, people seem to like it.
Do.
It's fascinating to read golf design pieces because you get reactions from readers at the bottom. Some say it's the greatest thing ever, and some say they don't like it at all because they weren't alive in 1890.
Right.
They don't care about.
You also aren't using
design.
your persimmon
no,
anymore either. So
true.
You know the complaint this year coming into
I'll
the US Open is the greens are going to be really hard.
You
but
better
it's the
be
US
able to
Open.
play around the greens.
It's the U.S. Open.
Yes,
I mean, what do you expect, right? That's going back to the Jack Nicklaus thing.
Yeah.
Who's really ready to play this thing and who isn't? That'll be fascinating. We'll keep an eye on Wyndham Clark and the U.S. Open as the week goes along as well. But the Colorado Rockies ended up finally getting the bats going last night in a win. Today, the bats got going, but well, they lost in a football.
Are the
storm.
Twins still up in the bottom of the eighth?
No,
they were up for about half an hour.
Yeah, it's and there's a result for that. It's mercifully over. The Rockies finish about a touchdown short. We'll tell you more about that in the meantime. But maybe you're getting a little hungry, a little peckish. We're talking about some places to get yourself a little bit of grub. Sandy's got the spot for you.
It's that time of day, and you've heard their signature ads for years around here. Now you probably know that they're locally owned, operated. GB Fish and Chips, the best drinks, meat pies, and fish and chips anywhere. But they also cater. And with graduation and summer block party season upon us, or at least right around the corner, summer is technically not quite here yet.
Feels like it today.
If your friends and family, unique fry on-site experience, whether it's late spring or early summer, the temperatures, I don't think it feels like summer today. Doesn't feel like the spring. But the best part of catering, obviously, is you don't have to do anything, and GB Fish and Chips does all the work. Stop by any of their 4 metro locations or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
The Colorado Rockies lost the first game of their series against the Minnesota Twins on the road. They did get one last night in a 5-4 game in which Cal Quantrill somehow, on a team that is 24 and 44 as of today, has a 6-4 record. Not easy to pull off to have a winning record at all when your team is 20 games under 500. But Quantrill, 6 innings pitched, 5 Ks, only a walk. Again, kind of his pattern for the year. Not big strikeout numbers, but good strikeout numbers. But the walks stay to a minimum. 100 pitches, and the bullpen makes it a little dramatic, but they do hold on 5-4 and get the win. Home runs by Ryan McMahon and Ezekiel Tovar. Tovar now ties McMahon for the team lead with 11 home runs as Tovar continues to ascend. 3 RBIs last night. So a good win for the Rockies. And then if not entirely erased, of course, as the bats finally come to life, because in the previous 2 games, Sandy, 1 run in 18 innings for the Rockies. They got 5 last night. Today in the matinee, they got 9. Usually you score 9 runs in baseball, you win.
Well, I think they gave up 7 in the bottom of the 8th. Though.
Yeah, they did. Sometimes you lose. If you're the Rockies, you find a way to lose by 8. That's right.
Yeah.
17 to 9. So
That's
2 touchdowns and a field goal for the Twins or Vikings, and 3 field goals for the Rockies. The Rockies cough up 24.
I prefer to look at it as a touchdown and a 2-point conversion.
There you go. See, more modern more modern gap. That's a solid way of making it up. No 2-point conversion.
Or a safety, I guess.
Or that.
Touchdown, extra point.
Something.
Safety.
But the Rockies came up short despite scoring 9 runs. That's what happens when you allow 24 hits and strike out. This is not a joke. 24 hits and strike out 4 batters.
Yeah.
Bright side, you're clearly hitting the strike zone. Maybe a little too much.
Yeah, it was bad.
And this was Austin Gomber, who behind Quantrill has been their second best pitcher. 11 hits, 8 earned runs, although 2 of those 4 strikeouts in only 3 innings before Gomber's removed. His ERA rockets up to 4.26 because of that performance today.
Not including today's game. I want to make a point here, and I am not really putting a value judgment on this, and I suppose it's one of those good news, bad news scenarios, but from roughly May 9th through last night, the Rockies actually had a winning record after an 8-28 start, 16-15. Now, with the loss today, they're 16-16, but let's exempt today's game from these calculations. So I went and looked at all of the teams in Major League Baseball and how they fared from May 9th through what was last night, the 11th of the month. 33 days, roughly. And there is good news in that the Rockies have a winning record over that stretch. The not so great news is 15 of the other 29 teams have as good a record over that stretch or a better record than the Rockies have. Although, and this is the best news, within the division, the Dodgers are 16-13.
That's remarkable to me.
Arizona is 15-15.
Wow.
You have a 16-15 in San Diego and with the Rockies, and a 16-14. Pretty tight. So
pretty tight and pretty mediocre.
This is a frequently cited Rockies argument that for certain stretches, and this is again roughly 1/5 of the season, a little bit less than that, but 1/5 of the season, that they've been roughly as good within a game of the Dodgers over this 33-day stretch.
Yeah. Never let anyone tell you that April doesn't count in baseball. You know, teams have a bad April, and everyone says, "Oh, it's early." Look, the wins and losses in April count the same as the wins and losses in September. And the bad start absolutely doomed the Rockies, and that's a shame because the Dodgers have not been obviously they're 42-26. But they haven't been as dominant as everyone expected. And you just went through the rest of the NL West, which is decidedly mediocre on the season. The Padres are one game over 500. The Giants, Diamondbacks, and Rockies are all losing teams.
Yeah. But in the last 33 days, the point being that the Rockies have been competitive, at least within their own division. And the fact of the matter is, we know this has not been so far apart from maybe the Philadelphia Phillies. Now that Atlanta has slumped off without Acuna, and the Dodgers obviously have been playing win one, lose one for more than a month now. Only one team over this stretch we're talking about in the National League has won 20 games, and that's Philadelphia. Right at 20 wins and 8 losses. No one else in the National League over the last 33 days, not including any action today, has won as many as 20 games. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Now, in the American League, you have the Orioles who have won 20, the Yankees who have won 23, Cleveland's 19-9. Obviously, a lot more strength in the American League apart from the White Sox, who are just terrible, and a couple of teams in the American League West, well, at least one. Couple of teams have been really bad. The world champion Texas Rangers, 9-18. Oakland, 8-22 after a decent start. The Angels not very good either at 11-18, but everybody else, White Sox accepted, everybody else in the American League is playing pretty well. And that's why you look at the wild card race now in that league and in the National League as well. And this is what's frustrating about the Rockies. You have Minnesota as the third wild card qualifier in the American League going into today. Toronto only 2 games back, Boston 2 back, Detroit 2.5 back, Tampa Bay 3 back, Texas 3.5 back, Houston 4.5 back. Any of those teams could get into the wild card race for the 3 spots available to wild card teams. National League, San Francisco and Pittsburgh are tied for the final wild card spot in the playoffs. Arizona half game out, Cincinnati half game, Cubs half game,
These are
St.
teams
Louis
with
half
losing
game,
records.
Washington 1 game out. The Mets who are 28-37, only 3.5 out.
That's amazing.
There are only 2 teams in the National League that are out of playoff contention. The Rockies, who would now be 9 games back, 8.5 going into today, and Miami 9 games back. That's the shame of it, right? If they had won 4 or 5, and we know they've blown at least half a dozen games this year, almost blew the game last night in the 9th inning with a 2-run homer with 2 out.
Right.
In the 9th to
Came
make
real
it
close.
5-4. It was a little sketchy there for a time. But they've blown at least half a dozen games they had no business losing this year. Now, probably they've won a few that they shouldn't have won too. But it wouldn't, if they had just won 3 or 4 more games, they'd be based on present form.
They'd be in the mix.
As we used the phrase yesterday, in the mix.
Absolutely. They finished the 7-game road trip 3-4, which for the Rockies, again, not exactly disastrous.
Not bad. St. Louis and Minnesota, and they were on a losing streak, remember, going into the road trip.
Right.
And they broke that right away by winning in St. Louis in the first game of that 4-game series last weekend. So they're playing basically for more than a month 500 baseball,
which is
it's
remarkable.
a legitimate 500. It's a legitimate based on quality of play, starting pitching,
quality of opponents,
the emergence of Tovar, the teams they played over the stretch we're talking about.
Look at who's
hasn't been just the bad teams.
Look at who's not here. And today, of course, no Elias Diaz. Was expected, but Jacob Stallings, as you brought up, the backup, 2 hits today for the Rockies.
Yeah, he's a pretty good hitter.
You do not have Herman Marquez, Kyle Freeland, Antonio Senzatella, Chris Bryant, for whatever that's worth, Nolan Jones, all out. Brendan Rodgers now out. This is a huge part of your core and your most expensive players, almost across the board, and they're all out. And give the Rockies credit. They've got some young players. I don't know how overall talented they are. I think we know about Tovar, but they do seem to be scrapping. And that is to Bud Black's credit. They finished this road trip 3-4. They will now come home for 7. They get Pittsburgh starting on Friday after an off day tomorrow, and then a 4-game weekend series against Los Angeles, and then 3 more against Washington after that for a grand total of a 10-game homestand for the Rockies. Look, they're 20 games under 500. They're not going anywhere.
Why couldn't they be the Washington Nationals? That's my question. Or even the Mets. Why couldn't and Washington's 1 game out of a wild card spot.
Right.
And the Mets are, as we said,
at 31 and 35.
Why couldn't they be right in that territory? You know, there are only 13 teams out of the 30 in Major League Baseball have a positive run differential, and 5 of the 6 divisions in Major League Baseball have a negative run differential.
Well, only the
American
White
League
Sox.
East,
right? And only the White Sox have a worse
one
one than the Rockies, minus 114. That's
even Miami's
an
minus 96 next to the Rockies 114.
Yeah, so it's obviously an issue, but they are playing better baseball despite the fact they're quite shorthanded, which I guess is absolutely to their credit. So the off day tomorrow, and then a very long homestand in which the Rockies maybe could make things interesting. The Dodgers will be certainly fascinating games, but Pittsburgh and Washington, both teams with losing records, teams that the Rockies at home, even though they have a losing record at home too at 13 and 17, should be able to, you'd like to see them take both of those series and see what they can do against the Dodgers. And who knows, maybe the streak will continue for the Rockies. They'll keep playing roughly 500 ball. It won't get them into the postseason, but it does give them something to build on as they continue this rebuild down at 20th and Blake. Well, want to remind you that over the course of the weekend, obviously things are getting hot. Things are, you're having friends out. You're going to get together with family. Maybe on these hot days like today, you don't even feel like cooking. Just going to bring something home. Well, we have a solution for you as well. It's time to get outside, have fun with family and friends. And why would you want to make it all yourself? You can't enjoy the party that way. You want to entertain everybody, but it's easier if you can get some good, delicious food that everyone's going to like and that you don't have to handle it, whether it's just for the family or a huge family gathering, or maybe, who knows, you throw in one of those block parties. You can't do any better if you want some barbecue than our friends at Rolling Smoke. Rolling Smoke is a terrific barbecue. They've started over at the Stanley Marketplace. Terry and his crew have done a terrific job of continuing to build that, and they build it because the food is good. That's step one. The food is good. So you have 4 different places in which you can find Rolling Smoke, and that would be in Aurora, inside the Stanley, as I pointed out, the original. Then in Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University in Centennial. That's the one I go to. Go grab some of that honey bourbon sausage. Believe me, you will not regret it. And the newest location is up at 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And more than that, if you just wanted to get a little sample, if you're up at one of the shows at Red Rocks this year, whatever it is, don't grab a hot dog or anything like that. Go ahead and try some barbecue. The barbecue up there is Rolling Smoke. So go ahead and give it a shot, and then come back, try one of those 4 locations, 4 more, and bring what you had to everybody else, because it's easy whether you want to go ahead and go to the restaurant, just pick it up and bring it back. They handle it all for you. It's easy and it's delicious. Check them out at Rolling Smoke Barbecue online today at rollingsmokebbq.com. Sad news in the basketball world. Again, it wasn't all that long ago when the basketball world and sports world was mourning the loss of Bill Walton, and now another blow to the NBA's great history as Jerry West passes away at the age of 86. Jerry West, renowned, I think, by people of every age, is the man represented in the logo of the NBA.
Although not officially ever acknowledged by the NBA,
correct.
But even Commissioner Adam Silver today, in celebrating the life of Jerry West, noted that, boy, it sure looks an awful lot like West.
It sure does. And why not? I mean, the numbers are remarkable. And the 3rd player in NBA history to reach 25,000 points. Never missed the All-Star game.
And the all-time high score in the NBA Finals, still to this day.
Every year of his career, he was an All-Star. Went to the finals with the Lakers 9 times. 12-time All-NBA. NBA Finals MVP of the losing team in 1969.
The first time they gave out an award for the NBA Finals, an MVP award for the NBA Finals, and it came from
the team that lost.
Jerry West. And I'll never forget, in the postgame, Red Auerbach, who was not the most gracious winner in the world, saying, "I have never in my life seen a performance quite like the one Jerry West put on tonight in defeat." And remember, in that game, if you're old enough to go back, the Celtics were way ahead in the 4th quarter, I think by as many as 16 points. And West single-handedly shot the Lakers back to within a point. They ended up losing by 2, I think, 108-106. But he was magnificent in that series. And for his career, this is a guy who broke his nose 9 times and didn't miss a lot of games. Unlike Bill Walton, he didn't miss a lot of games. And, of course, they weren't playing through much of his career 82-game basketball seasons.
I've only done it 4 times. That was plenty. 9?
9 times.
Goodness gracious.
9 times.
Yeah, you can probably tell if you're,
He was the scoring champ in 1970, averaged more than 31 points per game. He had a 27-point-per-game career average, and 4 times in his career, he averaged more than 30 points per game.
And, of course, he went on to be a brilliant executive. The Showtime Lakers of the 80s, more or less, in many ways, his creation, along with Pat Riley, and then even stayed long enough for the Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant pair.
Well, he was centrally responsible
win that as
for
well,
the acquisition of O'Neal and the trade, technically, that brought Kobe Bryant to the Lakers. But how about getting into the Hall of Fame? And he'll be honored later this year, by the way, as a contributor.
Correct.
But 3 times getting into the Hall of Fame.
3 times.
1980 as a player,
crazy.
2010 as one of the Olympic heroes of the 1960 team, led by Jerry West and, of course, Oscar Robertson. And now in 2024 as a contributor posthumously. And he 3 times in the Hall of Fame. But absolutely, I think, in the history of sports, the man with the most complete and remarkable record as a player and as an executive.
Yeah,
it can't match.
Yes, it's not matched.
Nobody can match it.
As you can imagine, the sentiments poured out across the NBA world. LeBron James on social media said, "We'll truly miss our convos, my dear friend. My thoughts and prayers go out to your wonderful family. Forever love, Jerry. Rest in paradise, my guy." And then went on to say, "My mentor, my friend. Hopefully, I can continue to."
And
make
Michael
you proud."
Jordan said many of the same
already
things,
missed. Jordan, said, "I'm so deeply saddened at the news of Jerry's passing. He was truly a friend and a mentor, like an older brother to me.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Logo." Pau Gasol reached out, of course. Nicholas Batum. I mean, as you can imagine, all the way around the league. Even Meta World Peace, the former Ron Artest, and the challenges there. Quote, my guy, Jerry, brief interactions, but you could always feel the fire inside. May the logo live on.
I can't say that I knew Jerry West, but I was around him quite a bit. And I was close to people who knew everything there was to know about Jerry West. And a more formidable competitor, I don't think has ever existed. And I would include Michael Jordan, and I'll bet Michael Jordan would include Jerry West among
you talked about that
great competitors of all time.
Comeback that got him the NBA Finals MVP, despite the fact they lost. Remember, who was some of his teammates during these runs? Will Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor. I mean, these are all-time greats. And it's still West the one dragging them back. And so, I mean, obviously, when you talk about the entire body of work, it's remarkable. By the way, he also won gold medals in 59 and in 1960, an Olympic gold medal.
And I want to say this, too, because on Mile High Sports, we'll hear from Rick Perea today, and I'm one of the guests. June is Mental Health Month.
Correct.
And Jerry West, in his book, his autobiography, talked about his struggles with mental health. He had a tough upbringing. He was abused by his father, no love in his life growing up. Basketball was a sanctuary for him. And I remember the stories he'd tell about looking out over the Appalachian Mountains, sitting on his porch growing up, looking out and saying, I wonder if I could get to the top of that highest mountain, look to the other side and ever come out on that other side of the Appalachian Mountains, which he did. He lived his dream. And he was tormented by losing, and more so by bouts with depression. And you read about it all. He's very vulnerable in his book. He's very honest in his book. And from what little time I spent around Jerry West, he was one of the 5 most authentic people and honest people I was ever around. And he was that way privately and publicly, too. You ask him a question, he'd give you an honest answer.
Magic Johnson, and I'll read you, it does have some length, but it's worth it. Magic Johnson took some time to put his thoughts together, and you can imagine there are very few people when it comes from West's career as a builder of that Showtime Lakers who would know better, and I'll read it to you. So Magic wrote today, I met Jerry West for the first time in 1979 at the Forum when he introduced me to Bill Sharman, Chick Hearn, and then Laker owner Jack Kent Cooke. My father, agent, and I had negotiated over lunch, and then Jerry took me to the locker room to show me my Lakers jersey. I started to cry, and Jerry explained to me the expectation of wearing the purple and gold, how he saw my role, and how he envisioned me fitting into the organization. I'll never forget that moment. When training camp began, he gave me so many golden nuggets and critiqued every facet of my game. After every practice, he would give me notes on how I could get better, and those sessions carried over into the regular season. Once a week, we went over what I needed to improve and how I could dominate in the league. These meetings meant everything to me because I learned so much from him. We had a basketball camp in Hawaii called the Jerry West Magic Johnson Fantasy Camp for 20 years. At that camp, we shared every meal together, and that's when we really bonded and solidified our great friendship outside of the Lakers. Jerry West was more than a general manager. He was a great friend and a confidant. He was there in my highest moments, winning 5 NBA championships, and in my lowest moment when I announced my HIV diagnosis, and we cried together for hours in his office. Every time I achieved a goal or crossed a milestone, one of the first calls I received was from Jerry West. When I started my business, when I was inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame, when I was named Lakers president of basketball operations, he would always pick up the phone and give me a personal call to congratulate me. Beyond his basketball accolades as a basketball player and NBA executive, Jerry West was a great man, a great leader of men, fiercely loved his family and friends, and despite holding jobs with other franchises, was a Laker fan for life. Laker Nation, the only reason we have 17 NBA championships is because of Jerry West and his expertise drafting players, trading for players, and hiring the right coaches. Today is a sad day for basketball fans and sports fans across the globe.
You know, Jerry West played during the Boston Celtic dynasty, at least in the 1960s, right? And had it not been for those Celtic teams, the Lakers would have won 4, 5, maybe even 6 world championships. And I went back and looked today, those 6 series that the Lakers played with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, and the last time Wilt Chamberlain, as you noted, in 1969. The series went in Boston's favor 6 times, but look at the scores or the game counts. 4 games to 3, 4-2, 4-1, 4-3, 4-2, 4-3. I mean, look at the 3 seventh games. And I remember each one of those seventh games, we just talked about the last one of those seventh games. The Lakers easily could have won those games. And the only reason they had a chance to win at the end was Jerry West. Elgin Baylor did not play well in any of those seventh games. And a couple of times he was hurting past his prime, had knee problems, and wasn't able to contribute. West could have been, had there been a Finals MVP award, even in those losses. He got MVP the last one, but that was the first year it was given out. If it had been given out the other time, he would have won 2 or 3 on the losing side very, very easily. He was the dominant player in those series, and nobody else was taking the Celtics to 6 and 7 games every time. Nobody. None of their Eastern Conference rivals in the playoffs were taking them to 6, 7 games. Oscar, Wilt, they weren't going 7 games, 6 games, 7 games every time, pretty much like the Lakers did. And the Lakers didn't have a center who could compete with Russell. They never had a center. They had West, they had Baylor, and finally, yes, they did have Wilt, but
overall win, an advanced metric
Russell
that you can sort
almost
of
always be Wilt.
apply going back. The win shares metric, which is a measurement of the course of your entire career. At this point, the number 1 player in the history of basketball is LeBron James. And then down the list, you have Michael Jordan, Tim Duncan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaquille O'Neal. You'll notice a lot of forwards on that list thus far. Kobe Bryant, Bill Russell, Julius Erving, and right outside the top 10 all time at number 11, Jerry West.
And we did this a few months ago.
And one
we
spot
picked our
ahead
all-time teams
of Larry Bird.
Yeah. We picked our all-time teams.
Yeah.
Jerry West would probably not be on my first team, but he'd be on my second team.
But out of those
if
people,
you're going by position and not just having 3 centers, on the team, because they're 3 of the best 10 players of all time. I mean, you'd have Russell, Wilt, and Kareem. Just off the top of my head, but you couldn't put them together on it.
But if you count Jerry West as a point guard, which I do.
Yes, and he led the league in assists.
The top 2 all time that we just went over that list, the man he drafted, Magic Johnson, and Jerry West.
Yeah.
Arguably the most effective point guards in the history of the sport, a monumental loss.
They weren't point guards back then. They were just guards.
I
mean, West played with
guards
Gail Goodrich late in his career when Goodrich was really in his prime. And who can forget that 33-game winning streak in 1972? It still stands, right?
Yep.
It's the NBA record, 33 games in a row. And that was late in Jerry West's career. That was 2 years before he retired, really a year and a half before he retired. He retired pretty much in mid-season, the 73-74 campaign. But you're talking about Jerry West in his mid-30s.
And the training regimen wasn't what it is today.
Winning streak.
Yeah, it's a very different thing. So obviously the NBA loses an absolute legend. The basketball world is legend. As Sandy put it, perhaps nobody has a fuller resume in the history of the NBA.
Or in any other sport. And we've seen some successful players turned executives. No one has West's record.
Not like this. So a monumental loss for sports and an opportunity to reflect on an extraordinary career. Thank you to Doug Ottewill, the editor-in-chief of Mile High Sports Magazine. You see him right up here. The golf issue is out right now. Wyndham Clark right over here, set to defend the U.S. Open tomorrow out at Pinehurst. We'll check on that. And Alex Singleton for the Broncos on the other, as the Broncos undergo their mandatory minicamp. That will wrap up tomorrow. We'll talk about that as well. Thanks to Danny Bailey in the booth. He's the man that makes all of it work. Thanks to you, most of all, for watching and listening. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and look right down. It's right down there. It's a little button that says subscribe. Shawn Drotar will be back tomorrow. But you can go right here. This is Mile High Sports.